going to say good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us today. We certainly appreciate your time. We know how difficult it can be to break away from the workflow and join us for what might be as much as an hour, but typically not. And we are going to talk about unified messaging today. But first, for those of you who may not be familiar with AVST or are joining us for the first time, we'll tell you a little bit about who we are. As the title of the webinar, certainly we're going to spend most of our time talking about unified messaging, both from an industry point of view as well as ours, and then offer you some considerations for you to contemplate if, in fact, you're looking at or planning to deploy unified messaging. And as Emily said, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So, in a name, AVST stands for Applied Voice and Speech Technologies. AVST is a developer of unified communication software with over 15 million users worldwide. Now, unified communications wasn't what we called it 10 years, well, maybe we did 10 years ago, but not 20 or certainly not 30 years ago when our original product was first developed and brought to market. Certainly, as you can see, and not too different from many other organizations in this space, over time, names change, mergers take place. But the good news is here, all along that time, the original product is what we continue to expand and developed into the product line that we have today. AVST's CX Series product line is a best-in-breed unified communications software offering solutions in mobility, voice, and business process. Now, as I mentioned, 30 years at this. Because of our seniority in the marketplace and the amount of time that we've remained independent, we have become a leader in the UC space because of our strength in interoperability. This is really important to remember and something we're going to talk a little more about later on. Now, at the top of the slide, we say own your future. We say that here while expressing the fact that the CX platform offers a very flexible licensing and component architecture. What you'll find is our product, in comparison to others in the industry, is very easy to add UC functionality in the future if, in fact, budget doesn't permit it today. This gives you the option to deploy at your own pace. And what I mean by this is you won't be required to add servers and hardware and additional infrastructure on your telephony side, let's say, for example, just for the sake of adding UC functionality. In our case, it's merely just the addition of licenses. And lastly, AVST offers a very flexible solution in the CX product line. What you'll hear and see in today's talk is just how we can support a variety of implementation models as well as remain flexible if your environment should change. Point being, we'll be able to change along with you. Now, the reason for choosing as the topic of this webinar is based on recent surveys like this one, which point out that unified messaging is one of the top, if not the top driver in enterprise unified communications initiatives. As you can see here, was chosen by 26% of the respondents as the top priority for those organizations who are planning or deploying unified communications. In fact, in another survey I just saw recently, we saw as high as 46%, second only to enterprise voice, which interestingly enough isn't really listed here as a component of the drivers for this particular survey. This one was more IT-based, while another had telephony included. So in that one, was certainly second, but very high in terms of percentage of priority relative to what was going to be important to them when they start to plan or deploy unified communications. Now, as I mentioned before, AVST has been around a long time, and in fact, AVST has been delivering forms of to the marketplace for over 20 years. We, in fact, were one of the first to deliver to the desktop. So as you can see in this study here done by ComFusion, AVST is clearly a leader in unified messaging, not only in delivering a more complete solution above all others, but also in our ability to lead the market, even up against the biggest names in the industry like Microsoft, Cisco, and Avaya. Most consultants and enterprise customers agree that when planning and deploying their UC infrastructure, rather than expecting a single vendor to provide all UC functionality, one of their highest priorities is an ability to choose best-in-breed class products for each of those respective UC functions. So, for example, unified messaging being we consider ourselves to be a best-in-breed, and in fact are rated by Gartner and others as best-in-breed in unified messaging. That alone isn't enough. What's important to also consider is that that best-in-breed product, such as us, needs to be able to interoperate with the other UC components making up what is going to be your UC infrastructure. So integrating with email alone isn't enough, and in order to really fit into a UC architecture without being a single brand name or one component of a single brand name product, it's really important that the product you choose is able to interoperate with everything else in that circle. We talk about the AVST CXE, in this case product line, based on three different feature pillars, if you will. To the left, you see mobility and a list of features that in fact we employ to make or provide functionality to that mobile user, because of course we are becoming more and more mobile these days and expected to be just as productive. So we need to be able to offer features and functionality to the mobile user that give them that ability to remain productive as if they were at their desks, and perhaps add some new functionality that they didn't necessarily have before, but will obviously be very necessary as a mobile user. Obviously, in our case, unified messaging falls under this heading because of the fact that unified messaging, or I should say the handheld device, is another device that we all have become so used to having and expect to carry, and is certainly a delivery for messaging of all types, i.e. unified messaging, makes that possible on that handheld device. In the center there you see UC Voice, which is in fact the core of our product and where this all began. And here we bring you speech enablement from an auto attendant capability, all sorts of call processing applications, voicemail, and fax. On the right, business process is our ability to communications enable business process and extend the CX product to a point where we're actually able to access or provide information access and delivery to telephone callers, for example, or provide click-to-call applications from a web portal or other types of applications internally, regardless of what your PBX infrastructure is. Now, I mentioned interoperability earlier on, and I hope you recall that, because all of this wouldn't be possible without our strength and ability to interoperate in an environment that most undoubtedly will be with disparate products, not typically a single manufacturer name providing everything else in that UC infrastructure. So let's narrow it down to unified messaging. Certainly, as we've pointed out, rated best in breed by UC analysts in the industry, and that's because we've been held in high regard because of our longevity and the flexibility that we bring to organizations, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. What you can see here is that we, in fact, are capable of integrating to a multiple of email systems, regardless if they're premise-based or cloud. And there's a lot of movement in that direction, both at least from an email perspective, but cloud-based solutions are becoming more and more popular in the UC space, as you might have seen from some of these surveys. The interesting thing that we can provide is that we can integrate to multiple email servers simultaneously, and this is incredibly important if in fact you're doing or thinking of doing just what I'm saying, and that's moving from a premise-based solution that you might currently have to a cloud-based one. So we can be that tool that helps you swing groups of users, departments of users, or entire organizations from one email infrastructure to the cloud-based infrastructure, all the while keeping unified messaging in place. We'll also show you from a flexible storage point of view that we have multiple options in that regard and can accommodate an organization's requirements for confidentiality or perhaps legal regulations that might prohibit them from actually delivering voicemail to the email inbox, if you will. And that's, of course, what most people think of when we talk about unified messaging, but be aware that there are actually other options. We talked a little bit already about access to the mobile device and the email client. There's also a web interface that can give you access to an email client, or if in fact your voice messages are not in email, then we can provide you a web interface for that as well. Text-to-speech and voicemail-to-text also go in hand with a delivery, and pretty much an expectation today at this point. And certainly for those that might be international participants of this webinar today, we certainly can provide localization in terms of different international languages, and that's from a text-to-speech perspective as well. So as I mentioned before, interoperability, once again, very, very important. We having the experience that we do regarding our ability to integrate with so many different systems, if you will, in that UC ring or circle, Exchange obviously being one of the most popular. We've had an integration to the Exchange product line for years, and their new offering in the cloud, Office 365, of course, we've followed suit along with that and provide functionality in that regard, and also for all the other big players. In fact, with our next version, 8.5, we'll be supplying even additional functionality for the cloud-based concept of unified messaging. So let's talk about unified messaging from AVST's perspective, in that we offer flexibility in architectures when it comes to options that you have. And the good news with our product, as opposed to some others that you might find in the industry, is that we have an ability to actually mix and match these architectures in a single system. So what that really means is, and I'm going to go through in the next couple of slides describing in detail what each of these architectures are, that based on a single user or department or maybe a location's requirements, one architecture may not necessarily fit their need as well as another. And so there's no need to be forced into one particular architecture because of the technology that that product provides. Rather, you should be able to implement in such a way that it, in fact, enables your user community based on their particular requirements. And so hopefully with the next couple of slides, you'll get what I mean by that. So what we refer to as server unified messaging, or server-based unified messaging, I should say, is the typical one that most of you and everyone else thinks of when we talk about and that's where voice messages and perhaps fax messages all arrive in the same single store, the email server. So all message types are in a single location, providing the benefit for everything that single location can do. And of course, with the Exchange example, the terrific things that Microsoft has done there in terms of providing you access to that single message store through various devices, various interfaces, we can continue to support that whole paradigm and provide a unified messaging solution with that Exchange product as well. Certainly we're up to the latest versions of what Exchange has out there, and as you heard me say before, moving towards the cloud-based solution with Office 365. In the server-based unified messaging solution, the interesting thing to note, as well as a few others that I'm going to talk about here, is everything is synchronized from our unified messaging perspective or our delivery. So if you're expecting a blinking light on your telephone based on the fact that you got a message waiting, a voice message, clearly there's a message waiting in voicemail based on that. However, it's going to show up in your email as well. Regardless of which device you use to listen to that message or act on that message, the status of that message should change appropriately regardless of whatever device you look at afterwards. So if you were to launch and play that message in your Outlook interface, well then that light on the telephone should obviously go out, and certainly the true would be vice versa. So rest assured, in each of our implementations, you will in fact get that kind of synchronization. And that will be true with our implementations into cloud-based solutions as well, both from an Office 365 and Google Apps applications. Client-based unified messaging is an alternative that we offer to the server-based solution, and this might be necessary in what might be an individual's case, a department, or perhaps a whole location based on the nature of or the kind of work that they do. For example, healthcare. There may be provisions there or legal issues which prohibit the location of voice messages to live in email, because then an organization would be obligated to make those voice messages what is known as discoverable for the sake of being able to research historically the messages and or message types that they have stored in that message store. So client is another option that gives you access to voice messages stored on our product, the CX, so that it's still a desktop solution and still in that familiar email, or in this case Outlook client interface, albeit it would be in a different inbox. And basically how we're doing that is by making the CX look like another email server. Many of you may be familiar with the concept of programming your email client to access more than one email server, and so you can bounce between different inboxes to gain access to those particular messages. So this would act in fact the same way and provide access to voice messages alone in a separate inbox just for CX. The good news here, again, as I mentioned before in the server-based discussion, is synchronization, MWI, message waiting indicator, all those types of things will continue to be in place just as you would expect them to. Another option, which we happen to call secure unified messaging, might be even more useful in certain organizations, let's say, that have a legal department or are obligated by, let's say, legal compliance in order to keep those messages as secure as possible, although those users should not be restricted by having to only use a telephone in order to listen to voice messages. So we can provide a unified messaging solution through a browser that keeps the message secure. And the way in which we do that is not by providing a WAV file attachment to the interface, but simply streaming that audio through the interface, making it impossible for the user to either save that message locally on a hard drive or a USB stick, or to actually send it outside of the organization altogether. The message could be shared with other users on the system and forwarded or replied to if in fact it was from another user, but from an outside caller, that message would not be able to leave the organization. And so this too could have a place in the organization depending on what the requirements of that particular user or department are. And in this case, what we call simplified UM or simple UM is really more of a message notification that makes it possible using SMTP to send an email to any SMTP-enabled address and notify a user of the fact that they have received a voice message back on the voice message server, or in fact send them a copy of the message for instant gratification. So in fact, if they were not a UM user but were delivered this simple UM option, they'd be able to listen to a copy of the message on their handheld device, although back at the office it would still be considered unread or in that new message state, because this in fact is a non-licensed version of unified messaging, making it easy to deploy to everyone in the organization should some others require some of these other license type scenarios. So again, to support what I was saying before, all four of these options can be deployed on a single system, and some can, the server-based version might be best suited, let's say, for the mobile users, while client-based might be better suited for people who are a bit more stationary and in the office more often than not. And the web-based security version might be good for the legal department, and yet again, simplified might be good for everyone else in the organization, should there be limitations to budget or what have you. We think there are these following considerations for you to contemplate when considering deploying or in fact deploying or considering products that you might deploy as a unified messaging solution. And the reason for this is that not all unified messaging products in the market are alike. As I mentioned earlier, your decision on a product should be based more on what's best for your organization and how it operates now and in the future, rather than being forced to implement it in one particular way or another based on that particular technology's requirements. So, for example, compliance. Does your organization have, as a whole, or perhaps a few departments, or even one, as I've been saying, legal stipulations, either based on industry standards or some compliance that's necessary for you to comply with? You'll want a product that can support the organization's expectations for compliance. Confidentiality, in this case, it may be just as important as compliance, or maybe even more important, even though your industry might not be bound by laws that require confidentiality. Preserving your customers' privacy might be the most important thing to your company's reputation, for example. And so from the president and CEO down, these are things that you might want or need to consider when unified messaging is being contemplated. Configuration. Does the UM product you're choosing offer a flexible enough architecture to accommodate your existing landscape, as well as the evolution of where that may go? And a perfect example of that is your premise-based email organization now But there are plans, and it looks like that you might be moving to the cloud, yet unified messaging is necessary. And so don't be restricted by a product that can't take you to the cloud or to go with you to the cloud when you move your email infrastructure there. And obviously, based on what we've shown you here today, AVST's CXE can accomplish that for you. Capacity. Many UM products in the marketplace deliver an all-or-nothing type solution. Does this play well into your environment? Does implementing UM mean additional cost to the organization in order to support UM in the future? It shouldn't be. And lastly, cost. Consider all of your costs, not just for implementation, but ongoing maintenance. Don't be caught by that word free or the phrase it's built in used by many other products that are out there. Make no mistake, there will be licensing and maintenance costs for year 2 and on. Make sure you know what they are. We may have already accumulated some questions at this point.
Yes, we have. And go ahead, if you do have any questions at this time, you can still type it into the question pane, and we'll try and get to all the questions. And people are typing, so let me just scroll up here. Okay, first question. How will mobile recipients control the mode of message notification and retrieval? Example, when driving a car or sitting in a meeting.
Well, that's a good question, because mobility can be defined in many different ways. The fact that you're away from your desk but just down the hall in a conference room means you're mobile. So, what can you use to control that? And so in our case, we can provide not only controls, but options that deliver the voice message in a number of different ways to give you access to those messages regardless of where you are. So, for example, being in a meeting, we all have a tendency to have our smartphones with us. We used to call it the BlackBerry prayer, where you'd kind of hide it under the table, but still watch your inbox for things that you might have to attend to or be aware of, yet trying to be courteous to everyone in the meeting. With the voicemail to text feature that we talked about a little earlier, we'd be able to send an email to that same inbox with a conversion of that voicemail to text, so you'd be able to read and simply get the gist of what that voicemail message was without having to disrupt a meeting or, in fact, go on the phone to listen to that voice message. As conversely, while you're in the car, certainly there are some other options, one of which might be you could actually take the call, firstly, with our mobility functionality, rather than letting it go to voicemail just because you're not in the office. Things like Find Me, Follow Me, and those types of applications will work in that regard if, in fact, you're capable of taking the call. And, of course, if it's not, then in our case, once again, based on notification that you may have reached, that may have reached you, and that could be a call out. Your account may be set up to call you every time you get voicemail, or in fact, you might just be checking in for messages. While in the car, the thing you want to do is use our speech interface, so that number one, it's legal, and number two, that it's safe for you to call in, not looking at your phone or manipulating the interface on your phone, to simply call in and say to the system, get new messages or get new voice messages. And once again, using our mobility functionality, you'll be able to accomplish that.
Great. And a follow-up question to that, how do you support mobile users who have a single mobile device for job and personal communication? That's more of a
BYOD. The latest in acronyms in the acronym dictionary. BYOD, Bring Your Own Device, is a program that is being brought up more and more in many organizations because they may not want to actually issue corporate issues of cell phones, and people are more interested in carrying one cell phone, not two, one corporate, one personal. And so employing our mobility, CX mobile apps, we have one for iPhone and one for Android at this point in time, actually supports a BYOD very well, because in fact, you don't need to have your business contacts exposed. You don't need to expose your personal smartphone telephone number to your business contacts if you use it within the context of our mobility feature set. What I mean by that is when they call the office, based on your personal assistant settings, the call will be extended to your personal smartphone, and you'll in fact get intelligence on who the caller is. So if it's very important customer number one, you can actually take that call and or decide, make decisions on what to do with that call based on something more important that you might be doing at the time. Moreover, in calling that person back or just calling them in general from the smartphone, you could be in your car, for example, you could use the CXE to make that call so that they're getting your corporate caller ID, not your personal cell phone caller ID. And so it works wonderfully for a BYOD or plan in an organization.
Great. Okay, next question is, are there different types of pricing for the 4UM products?
No, that's a great question, and unfortunately I didn't remember to bring that up. No, we have one UM license that works for all, and they're interchangeable, if you will. So they're basically in a pool of licenses that are available and get assigned to individuals, but if that individual leaves the organization, that license goes back to the pool and can be used for any new employee, as well as any one of those options that we discussed earlier.
Okay, next question is more of a maybe a future product roadmap, or if we have this available now. When we looked at AVST a year ago, AVST's user web interfaces weren't capable of interoperating with standard-based single sign-on methods. Are there any plans for this?
There, in fact, are, and I couldn't actually answer. Product management would have to be on the line to help us with that, but in terms of where we are in developing that as a deliverable, but I know that it is on the roadmap, and we have plans for it to be available soon, although I can't be specific, unfortunately, at this time.
Okay, and we can also go ahead and follow up with that individual offline.
Sure.
Next question. Do you have MWI integration with Google Mail?
I believe we will in the very next release of CXE version 8.5, but once again, without my notes in front of me, I would only be guessing. I'd rather check with product management to be sure.
Right, and again, we'll go ahead and follow up with them offline as well.
Right.
Okay, the next question is about Microsoft Exchange with Link. Given a Microsoft Exchange environment, could you talk a little bit about the value added for having AVST in conjunction with Link?
Well, certainly it wasn't really discussed today, but we did talk about our interoperability, and so the more I promoted it, I probably raised some questions, and we in fact do have an integration to the Link client. And so that just adds one more spoke to the wheel, if you will, with us being the hub in a disparate environment, although Microsoft's Link and Exchange are, the same brand product. We provide that telephony link, if you will, between the Link client, I didn't realize I stepped right into that, and the Link client and whatever dial tone infrastructure you have in your organization, and all the while, if in the event that a call doesn't get answered, it will end up in your CXE voicemail, which could ultimately be in your Exchange inbox, in fact, if you're a server-based user with AVST. I hope I answered that.
I think that was great.
Okay,
the next question, they're just asking, yes, the presentation is being recorded, and we're also going to send out a copy of the slide deck. So for those of you who didn't jump on right at 10 o'clock, we will give you the slide deck, and once we have the link to the video available of the recording, we'll go ahead and send that out as well. Okay, the next question, with client-based since the message is stored on the CX server, will mobile email clients have access to the message as long as the voicemail folder is accessible on the Exchange server?
And so the answer, in fact, with the CX mobile client, which is a downloadable app, both from the iTunes Store as well as the Play Store for Android, you in fact have touch interface through the app to the CX inbox. So it's a good question, because if you're a server-based user, well then obviously your voicemail will show up in your Exchange inbox, and that's the version you look at on your smartphone. But if you're a client-based or a web-based user, they don't go to Exchange. So what is the option there? The CX mobile client. It will give you the access to voice messages without you having to call in and listen to them.
Right. Okay, next question. Do you still transfer voicemail messages between the Exchange server and the CX server for 2E playback? How long are messages stored on the CX server after they are put on Exchange?
So I guess there were a couple of questions there. Let me make sure I do my best to answer them all. So we, in fact, cache copies of recent messages that get sent to the Exchange server or any email server, and that's the purpose. The purpose for that is to support playback right from the CX, rather than having to go over the network and pull that WAV file from Exchange. So there is a buffer that supports a recent amount of messages. It's based on a storage allocation that's determined at the time of implementation. So certainly at some point in time, older messages will not be in the cache stored on CX at some point, as new messages come in and push out the old. But certainly if you wanted to reach back in time and grab an old message, if it's still there in Exchange, then of course you'd have access to that as well.
Next question. Is there any message encryption available for Call Express?
That's a question we'd probably want to take offline, just to get a little more understanding of what in fact they're looking for.
Right. Okay. And then the last question we have, when will CXE have capability to be installed on VMware Virtual Server?
Well, in fact, CXE is currently available to be installed virtually. We are certified, or VMware ready, certified by the folks at VMware. And in fact, there's only one real restriction there, is that the integration to your PBX needs to be an IP-based one, because if you have a physical connection to your PBX, then the need for a telephony card in a physical server is still required, and there's no way we can really get around that. So as long as you have an IP-based integration to the PBX with your CXE, or can move to that, then we can certainly virtualize.
Great. That looks like that's all the questions that we have. Again, we'll go ahead and follow up with those of you offline. And again, we'd like to thank everyone so much for joining us today. And Ed, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, it was great. Thank you very much, Emily.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.